Hi, my name is Dale Mazzarella. I'm a Fly Fishers International Master Casting Instructor, a longtime Wyoming fishing guide, and an award-winning coach and educator. I've put together this video series that I hope will help you become a better fisherman, catch a lot more fish, and I hope you enjoy it. So enjoy yourself, have a good time, and let me know what you think. Let's talk about reels. Why do you need a reel in fly fishing? Well, number one, it stores your line and your backing. So I've got line and backing on all of these, and I have to have some place to put it. It provides drag or resistance when a fish grabs it, grabs your fly. You're going to have some drag. You're going to have to wear that fish out a little bit. And it retrieves line. So there's three major purposes of a reel, and all those are important, and we use them all, especially if we're fishing for bigger fish. That drag becomes very important, which you're going to see. Let's talk about the parts of a reel right now. Materials are usually nowadays are pretty much aluminum, but you can get reels in different titanium, different kinds of composites. There's a lot of different materials, but still aluminum is probably the number one material people use, or some type of aluminum alloy kind of thing. The body it can be cast or machined. If it's cast, it means it can be put together with screws and that kind of stuff. A machined is one block of aluminum usually that's machined so that it's just a one piece. But you know, today almost all reels that cost any amount at all are pretty good reels. The biggest issue that you're going to spend on a reel, the biggest thing you're going to spend money on a reel that differentiates a really good reel from a not so good reel is drag and different drag systems. I don't have any Click and Paul drag systems, but the Click, it's kind of a ratchet system and you can hear it. I don't like them because I don't like hearing the noise go, especially when they're running. A lot of people love that sound. If you love that sound, then that's a pretty good reel, especially in an inexpensive reel. But you don't want to get that kind of a drag system if you're trying to fish for big fish that run fast, because it's just not going to do the job. It's just not powerful enough. What you're going to need is a drag system it's a compression kind of system where the disc, it pushes, it's like a disc brake basically, and those drags can be made out of different kinds of materials again. Cork was the original one that people use, but there are other things now, different kinds of composites and so on. But for the most part, if you're fishing for any kind of freshwater fish that's going to really run, like a steelhead or a salmon or something like that, or you're fishing for saltwater, you're definitely going to need some kind of a drag system that's pretty stout, because you know, you get a big bonefish that takes off and goes 150 yards. If you don't have that drag that's pretty good, you can burn a drag up if it's a cheap system, or you can just break it, or it just doesn't stop the fish at all. You just keep on going until he tears off your line, or breaks your leader. Spool diameter. So this is a spool, extra spool for this rod or this reel, which is an entire reel. And so this is the diameter, obviously. And the bigger the diameter, the more line it's going to hold. In addition to that, something else that you should be aware of is, if you look at this here, this is the width of the spool compared to this one, which is basically the same make. They're both Tybor, but you can see that the width is considerably smaller. So this reel, given the same diameter, is going to hold more line. So so a lot of people want to have a bigger arbor, they call it. It's a large arbor reel. It's going to hold more line. The other thing you've got to consider when you buy a reel is what kind of a release system do you have. This one, for instance, has a little pin that you pull it and come out, and that's a real easy system to get in and out. This one has a button. You push the button and pull it in and out. This reel, which is actually a pretty expensive reel, this one you have to unscrew. So you're not going to change spools very fast. So this one, I have a intermediate sinking line on it, and then I have a floating line on this one. But if I want to change those two spools, it isn't a matter of seconds, it's a matter of a minute. Now, maybe that's not a big deal, but sometimes you got a big bunch of fish that all of a sudden are on the surface, and you've been fishing with this and you want to switch to this, it's going to be a little more cumbersome. But that reel, both these reels, or this reel and this spool, are just exceptional reels in terms of the drag system and the toughness of them. This part down here is called a foot, and a foot is usually connected by a couple of screws. It can be just one piece again, but if it's screwed, what I've seen a lot of times, if this piece here gets loose, if you're casting and you feel like your reel is loose, oftentimes it's because one of these screws has come loose. So make sure you put a little bit of Loctite on these screws and tighten them up, because that's kind of a problem. You've got your handle, and most of your handles are connected by a screw also, and that can also come loose. You don't want to lose your handle, because without a handle it's going to be really tough to retrieve, especially if it's a big strong fish. So those are some of the parts of reels. Let's talk about the size of reels, and then we'll go into some other stuff. But when we talk about a reel, first off, the smaller your reel is, given the application of it, the better off you're going to be, because it's less energy to cast a smaller reel. When I go to cast this big strong reel, and I've got this on let's say a 10 or 11 weight rod or a 12 weight rod, there's a lot of weight. And when I come back, this reel's got momentum. It comes up, and the heavier that reel is, the bigger that reel is, the more you're going to get fatigued during the course of the day. So any reel that you can use, I like to use the smallest reel I can get away with as a rule. So for instance, this one that's got a 4-weight line on it, and you can see it's really small compared to this one, which has a 12-weight line on it. So we got a 12-weight and a 4-weight. This one has hardly any backing on it at all, because it's for trout. And when I fish this 4-weight, generally speaking, I'm not worrying too much about trout tearing me into my backing. Where I fish for this reel is not going to be an issue. This reel, however, has about 250 yards of backing in it, which means it's got some kind of Dacron or similar kinds of core around the spindle, and that's what the line is hooked to. So if a fish takes off, he can go 200 yards. There are some guys who fish for tuna might have 300 yards of backing on their spool. So you need to have a reel that's big enough to take the line you want and the backing that you're interested in carrying, depending on how far a fish might run. For instance, here, when I fish in the flats, both redfish and snook don't tend to run real far, so I can use a fairly small reel on my 8-weight line. These are 8-weight reels that I put on for 8-weight, and they're not very big reels. And you can see, I haven't even, if you kind of look right here, you can see there's quite a bit of space. I haven't even filled that all the way in. This reel works really good. It's got about 100 yards of backing, and that's about all I ever need around here. There's not much the only time I've ever been in trouble is hooking a few jacks that took off on me. But as far as just snook fishing, red fishing on the flats, this is plenty. So you got to kind of think about the kind of reel that you have, and how much backing you're going to need, what's the size of the line, what kind of drag do you need, and those are the biggest single considerations. And do you want a spool that's easily exchangeable? Do you want to buy a reel that has extra spools? That's probably a good idea. In some of these, for instance, this one, the reason this is an extra spool, I've got a 6-weight on it and a 7-weight on it. So I can exchange these depending on what kind of fly I'm fishing. If I'm fishing a heavier fly or more wind, I'm going to go with a 7-weight. And if I'm fishing a lighter fly, I'm going to go with a 6-weight. So and I've also got 4 other spools with different varieties of sink tip lines. So this particular reel is my favorite river reel for fishing streamers, big nymphs, that kind of stuff. It's a 6-7 weight. It holds a 6 or a 7 weight, and you can see I have very little backing on here. I've probably got 100 yards of backing on this. So we're going to stop right there, take a break, and then we're going to talk about some other stuff. So let's talk about, if you're trout fishing, what kind of a reel should you use? If you're trout fishing for smaller fish in small little creeks like in Pennsylvania, Wyoming, Montana, and you're catching mostly 10, 12, 13-inch fish, then I would get a smaller reel. It would be maybe for a 3-4-5 or a 5-4-5-6 line. You don't need much backing on it. You don't need a real good drag on it. This kind of a reel, you could probably purchase this kind of a reel even with a disc drag system for somewhere between $50 and $150, and you'd be just fine. You just don't need a high quality reel. It's mostly, in those situations, your reel is designed mostly just for storage. as long as you can store line on it and you can reel the fish back in. They very seldom even run very much. So don't spend a lot of money on a reel unless you just want to do it. So this is the kind of reel I would get. You don't need an anodized. You don't need to make it saltwater proof. If that's all you're doing with it is fishing a 3 or 4 weight line on it, get a small reel, small diameter. Don't even need a real wide arbor on it, and put very little backing on it. Spend $100, maybe 75, 100, 150. If you just love, I mean, a lot of people just love the look of their reel. And obviously there's some really beautiful reels out there. You can spend a lot more money, but you don't need to spend that much money. So let's go to the next type. Let's say you're going to be fishing for intermediate trout, maybe smallmouth bass, trout, you know, smaller steelhead, that kind of stuff. And you're going to be in freshwater for the most part. Again, you don't have to worry about anodized. You can get a reel that's not anodized, so it's not saltwater proof. You can get a reel more like this. This reel is a 5/6 reel, and it's been plenty. I've caught a lot of nice big fish on this reel. It's got a super drag system. It's more like a $250 reel, but it's still small, it's still light, and it does the job. It's got a really good disc system on it, and it's tough, and it's got a ton of different spools that I can exchange with it. So this is my go-to kind of fishing reel 90% of the time. I even use this in saltwater because it happens to be anodized. So when I'm fishing the flats, and I'm in a flat that doesn't have any things that my fish are going to get under or around, I've got one big giant just sand flat. I mean, I've caught 25, 30-inch snook and redfish on this reel with no problem at all, but it's a fairly expensive reel. It's probably a $350 reel. If you're going to fish in saltwater exclusively, and you're going to fish for big steelhead, big fish they're going to run, then you're going to need a bigger reel. If you're just fishing for bigger fish but not huge fish, we're talking about, you know, snook, redfish, trout, salmon, that kind of stuff, then an 8 weight is probably fine. You get an 8 weight, you put 150, 200 yards of backing on it, which they're all going to be perfectly capable of handling. You make sure you got a really good drag system, because this same reel can be used for bonefish. Like I said, if you hook a jack, which I've done before, you get a 25-pound jack on your line and he takes off, you better have some good drag. So this has got to have good drag. That kind of a reel for moderate, what I call moderate saltwater fishing, I think $300. You can usually get a good reel for $300 to $500 that's going to serve you really well up until you get into permit and tarpon and you know, that kind of stuff. If you're going to get into those kind of big fish, then you're going to need a little heavier reel with a little more line. If you're going to fish for tuna, you're going to fish for things that are going to run a long ways. I hooked a rooster fish in Baja one time, and the thing only weighed 18 pounds. And I had 250 yards of backing on a 12-weight line. This reel, which is a good reel, kept cranking the drag down, kept cranking the drag down, lifted my rod up to try to increase the drag. The fish just kept going and going and going. That fish took off and took 200 yards of backing out of my reel in just a split second. If I'd have had this reel and hooked that fish, I'd have lost that fish for sure. So when you're fishing saltwater, man, that reel is going to be the one you want. Some kind of a big old giant reel with a lot of backing and hefty drag system. Those reels can cost up to $1,000 for a really, really good one. I don't think you need to spend that much money. There are some good reels in this category for $350 to $400 to $50 that are really good reels. They're anodized, great drag systems, easy to operate, super tough, going to last you a lifetime. Literally, a good reel will last you a lifetime. So in conclusion, I would say that if you're fishing for trout, especially smaller trout on smaller streams, the reel is the least important part of your outfit. I would say the line is number one, matching a line to the rod. And I found that almost any rod can work well if it's got the right line on it. But the reel is almost just doesn't matter. Whereas the opposite is true when you're fishing for big fish in saltwater. The reel might be the most important part of your system, because if you hook a fish in those circumstances and you don't have a good reel, you're going to either ruin your reel or lose the fish. So the reel becomes more and more important as the fish get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's certainly worth the time and effort to buy a good reel. And remember, this is a lifetime investment. This thing is not going to wear out. It's unlikely it's going to break if you take relatively good care of it, and we'll spend just a minute talking about that. When you're taking a reel, just rinse it off every time you come back. If it's an anodized reel with a closed system, which most of them are now, you can just rinse them off. Make sure your drag is set back down again to almost zero when you store it, so you don't compress, especially if you've got a cork. If you've got a cork as part of your drag system, you don't want to keep it down because it'll smash that cork. The other thing you need to do about once a year at least, and maybe more in certain circumstances, you want to make sure you put a drop of oil on that cork. So you need to take your reel apart, clean it really good, and then just take care of your reels like you would anything else. I've had some of these reels. This reel here I've had for 20 years. That reel is an old reel, and yet it looks brand new. It's caught a lot of big fish, and it still functions 100%. The only thing I've done with this reel, I've changed the backing about 3 times, and of course the fly line, because the backing and the fly line get old with age. But just in terms of taking care of it, a little oil on the drag system, clean out the mechanisms a little bit, and wash it off every single time. I just rinse it in cold water or warm water. I take it out on a garden hose when I get home. On my reel still, I'll wash the whole reel, wash the line, watch the guides, all the guides on the rod and the handle, and then that's it. And I've never really had a problem with anything wearing out, breaking, or anything else, at least not any of my more expensive reels. So pick your reel, go to a store, ask around, but don't be fooled into thinking you've got to spend a ton of money for a really good reel, unless you're fishing for big fish. The biggest single thing you want to have is a smooth drag system that's very consistent. If it kind of skips as you go, for instance, the bigger trout that we have on where I fish on the Hams Fork in Wyoming, you get a 5-pound fish that takes off and your drag does this kind of thing, he's going to break your 3X or 4X tippet, or he's going to certainly break 6X or 5X tippet, because that's just that little jerk is going to. So you want a nice smooth drag system. That's the biggest single thing. Go in a store, hold your fly, your reel, and you just pull, and it should be perfectly. You can see that's how fast the fish will go, and that's perfectly smooth. And then jack it down a little bit, put a little bit more pressure on it, and do it again, and see if it's still smooth. A lot of reels will function pretty well with a low drag, but as soon as you start cranking the drag down on them, then they get sticky. So check it. If that's important to you, then you're going to be catching bigger fish on relatively small tippets. You need a super smooth drag system. So check that when you get to the store.